Today, I want to talk about my top 10 individual fantasy books, not taking into account the entire series, just a single book. What's up, Average Joes? Welcome back to another list video, another top 10. And honestly, I didn't even think about this individual video of making a top 10 individual fantasy football, not football, it's football season though. Fantasy book list wasn't because I wanted to talk about these books. It was more so when I made my top 10 series list of all time. I made those the cards that'll pop up of a top 10 with sound and everything, and I was looking at my library and I was like, well, I should find a reason to use this top 10 because I took the time to make those 10 cards. So let's just find a reason to use them. So maybe I'll just start making up some random top 10s or something. But this is pretty good because other people are going through some of these series, and I just keep thinking about like the best books in some of these series. And I did my top 10 series list book, which I will try and link down below. But this is just taking in individual books within the series. Some of them I haven't even finished yet, which is why they weren't on my top 10 series lists. But I just remember that individual book being fantastic. So that is what I'm going to do today. And the parameters of this, and I do want to specify individual fantasy books. So there won't be any sci-fi on here. And that's basically it. There's not going to be a sci-fi. It's also all high fantasy, not any low fantasy. So Dresden won't be on here, or the Rook, or anything like that. So completely high fantasy individual books. So getting into it.
Lend me your ears. That's disgusting.
I'm going to have two honorable mentions, and that is because I have not finished these series. For one, I'm still very much somewhat in the very early stages of reading these series, but I know that they were ones that popped up, and I really want to kind of give them their due. But I'm also so early into the series that I don't know if it's going to be some other book is going to pop up to be even better within the series, because typically the farther you go on, the better they get. But those two are going to be Theft of Swords. So that is the first of the Rhaenyra Revelations, and I count one binding as one book because that's how I read it. Even though there's two stories within that book, it's just two stories, not two books. That's just how I do it, and that's how I add it on Goodreads and all that. So Theft of Swords was one of them, and then Dragonfly Falling, which is book two in Shadow of the App, which is I'm just finishing, and that series is kind of a it's going to be a favorite, I think. Bold prediction would be it's going to work its way into my top five, but a very realistic prediction is it will be a top 10 series of all time as I make my way through it. Because book two is fantastic. That's what Dragonfly Fallen is. It was such a huge step up from book one. But as I said, I'm only book two of 10 into this series. So I want to see where everything goes. All righty. Now that those honorable mentions are out of the way, number 10 is it has popped up in a couple of videos, and that is Priory of the Orange Tree. And this one is not a series because it's just a standalone. It is a fat standalone. It's about 800 pages, but it is a fantastic book, a fantastic standalone, and it could have been broken up into a trilogy of like 300-page books. But I think as standalone, I think they made the right call, just making it one fat book. It's good that a publisher did that versus trying to squeeze as much money out of people as they can. But Priory of the Orange Tree is fantastic because it is a standalone, self-contained. So it's almost cheating because it's an entire series in one. But there is so much to this world and so many things going on within this world that it's not like an overly simplified standalone story, typical YA or whatever fantasy that you might think. There's a lot to this world, and there's things go in directions that I did not expect them to go. A couple of the characters you do tend to really like. It's not a whole lot of time for character growth, but the plot and the world are fantastic within it. And I could probably see this continuing because of the world that was set up. You know, you have these two different types of dragons that are kind of at war with each other. It's been like over a year since I read it, and there is some magic to there. There's these a couple different kinds of magical forces, and different cultural and kingdoms that kind of war with each other normally, but some of them band together to vanquish this threat. Um, there's some ancient magic to it as well. It's hard to say a little bit too much about this, but I definitely recommend Fire of the Orange Tree, especially as a standalone, because it has everything self-contained within it, and it's just a really good one to add in. The next one is going to be Before They Were Hanged. Now, I have not shied away from giving the First Law trilogy, the first 3 books, crap, because I have a lot, because they were so hyped. I just felt like they didn't meet the hype. And when something is super hyped and doesn't meet it, you kind of feel let down and disappointed. So that's the kind of overall feelings I have toward the first trilogy. Even though it was really good, it's still a 4 out of 5 overall. But the only book that I gave a 5 out of 5 was Before They Were Hanged. That is book 2, the middle book. And this is because, so the first book is largely set up. It is largely a prologue and just getting into the characters. And I did still like it, but like not much happens at all. There's really nothing that happens except introduction to all the characters. That's fine. Book 2, they actually get going. Now that you actually know the characters, know their motivations, know where they're at, what they're after, there's 2 separate plot lines going on, one of which is like an adventure. They're going on a quest to go get something, and how these characters are now interacting with each other that you spent so much time in the first book getting to know. You're seeing how they would interact, how they're overcoming obstacles, how they're getting things done. And I think that was done really, really well. I think that's when you really start to see the characters grow, how they overcome certain challenges, how they have adapted, and just their bonding together. I think that was done really, really well in book 2, which it made you excited for book 3, even though some of which let down in book 3. But
you make me sad.
And then, so that's one storyline. The other storyline is a siege. And I really love sieges, especially when there is a smart person using their brain to overpower somebody that has insurmountable odds. And that is what has happened in the other one, with the normal, dark interrogation side of it, and discovering subplots and things coming after them on top of battling a siege and overcoming the siege. So the siege plotline was also very fantastic, because I just like sieges, and I like when somebody has to outthink somebody more powerful than they are. So Before They Were Hanged, number 9. Number 8, we have King of Thorns, and this is book 2 in the Broken Empire trilogy. And the reason why this one is so great is that, so book 1, you're introduced to Jorg and how evil of a character that he is, and how just so dark and unlikable this is as a protagonist, which to me felt refreshing. I said this in other videos, like when you read a book, you have this protagonist that's usually is on the safe side or is on the good side. So they meet a terrible person and you're just like, man, I just wish our protagonist would just stab them in the face. But in this book, Jorg actually does that. If there's anybody that's bothering him and usually bothering the reader or anything, he just kills them. And it's like, whatever, done.
Oh, dark. You sure you're not from the DC universe?
So super evil in the book 1. You learn a little bit about him in book 1, but book 2, you really learn about his upbringing, about why he is as evil as he is, why he decided to leave his kingdom, because he's a prince technically, but he decided to leave and go and be a bandit, and why he decided to do that, and the quest that he's on, and the dark past and things that he went through as a child to be where he's at. So you really learn the depth of him is one thing, so that you give perspective as to why he's so terrible of a person. And then the next thing is kind of like siege warfare as well. There's people are after him, and he has a small force against a very, very large force, super insurmountable odds that are after him. And he is regularly pushing them away, fighting them off, taking them down, and whittles his way down this huge army that should have overpowered them. But he has such a smart mind and plan and things set up to take this army on. So that is also a fantastic plot line that I love. It's similar with Siege, because it is very little against a lot, and having to outsmart someone. And at times when I was reading this book, it was it's Mark Lawrence's writing can be kind of jarring at times, to where he doesn't hold your hand. He can time skip, person skip, POV skip, and like he doesn't give any sort of segue. It's just done, and you just have to kind of like figure it out and maybe even backtrack. So there were times I had to backtrack a little bit, but in this one there is a time adjust, or two different timelines, or like different, like years apart. You'll read a chapter in the present of what the situation is, it's dire, and then it jumps back several years about something else relating to what's happening now, and it goes back to the present and how that applies to what's going on now, and it does that through a good majority of the book. It took an adjusting to get used to, but once it was happening, it made the outcome of the book that much smarter and more clever, because it was all very deliberate. So King of Thorns, 100%. If you have read Prince of Thorns and you're just like, Jorg sucks, I can't stand this, I would highly recommend doing the second book, because you do get much more of a perspective of to how and why he is the way he is, and then you just get a glimpse of how smart he is as well. Number 7. This one is kind of funny because it's book 1. So Rage of Dragons is number 7. I have not even read book 2. I haven't gone on to book 2. It's been out for like a year, over a year. Have not bought it because I just haven't seen it on sale. And I'm not paying like $14 for a Kindle book. Anyway, so Rage of Dragons, and it's also because I don't feel I think if I pick up the series, I could just pick it up whenever. It was a fun read, very high octane, very fast paced. It's up this high because it was fun for what it was. I blew through it super fast because it was just a self-contained, really great read. Now, as a series as a whole, as it progresses and goes on, it might be knocked for just too much. And like the protagonist, people who don't like Rage of Dragons hate the protagonist, and that he is just roid raging the entire time. And like rage is the key in this. He's just roid raging and has a vendetta, and that's all he cares about. And like there's times where he'll be like, all right, you know what? I need to make smarter decisions. And oh my God, did you just look at me funny? I'm going to kill you, is basically how his train of thought is the entire time. And he's just like on a mission and just is pretty dumb for a lot of points. But it was very fun. There's some really awesome battle tactics and military warfare, like skirmishes that they do, war games. That was very enjoyable. Him training to become this great warrior was fairly good. There were times where I was like, that's kind of okay, whatever. But how he overcomes this and what he becomes was very enjoyable to read. And I am excited to see where it goes, but I'm just not in any rush. But Rage of Dragons, if you just want a really high-paced revenge plot where this guy is just going to kill everything in his path to get what he wants, then Rage of Dragons was it. Number 6, for a basically completely different reason, is Wastelands. And this is book 3 in the Dark Tower. Now, Dark Tower, this is actually where I've left off in the Dark Tower, because I'm going through the entire multiverse reading of Stephen King's. And this is where I've left off because I have some other of his books to read first. But this one was fantastic because you start to see how all of the connections work. Okay, in Gunslinger, you are completely confused, don't know what the heck is going on. Drawing of 3, very, very good. He's assembling his team, and you are starting to see how connections work in the Dark Tower. And then Wasteland, you see even more connections and how it goes way back to things that happened in book 1 and the layers, and it just makes it much more complicated. There is some really good action. There's some really good scenes. The world becomes so much bigger and crazier, and you're introduced to some new characters that are very good and apparently have good things going forward, good stories going forward, huge impacts. But Wastelands was very, very enjoyable, and I would highly encourage people to get into the Dark Tower, because I think we'll see how I feel about the ending, because apparently it's very divisive at the end. But this might be a series that cracks into my top 10 series of all time list. We'll see. I might have to even expand my next top series to like 15 or 20. I don't know. Wastelands is just so smart because of all of the tie-ins. So instead of being super high paced, it is very clever of all of the tie-ins and how the connections work in this world, because everything seems to be connected. Number 5, moving into top 5. This one was really hard to rank. It could have been top 3, from all the way to the top 3 to number 10. This one was very hard to rank. It's been a year since I've read it, but that is Tyrant's Throne. And this is book 4 in the Greatcoats quartet. Fantastic series. The series is on my top 10. Tyrant's Throne, it was a great ending to the series, great conclusion to how everything happened. There were one or two things where that fell a little flat to me toward the end. Like I think like Falkio's letter, I think was very meh, and something else that happens to the end was kind of meh. But the battle, and again, small force versus a very large force, overcoming that. I didn't even realize how the theme was going to be in this, but that is definitely a theme that I love in a lot of books, because they have to be smart and clever. And if you know Greatcoats, they are sassy as well. And there was a lot of really, really fun moments in this. There was a lot of twists in this, and how they overcome things is fantastic. And just classic Greatcoats being who they are, classic moments from them. Maybe because it was the conclusion as well, you just felt good how everything ended. But it was a very, very good ending. So some people find one of those books they struggle on. They're all very different, and they have their own specific focus per one of the Greatcoats, but Tyrant's Throne is a fantastic ending to the entire quartet. So I would highly, highly recommend the series as a whole. It was even hard to pick which one of those I liked best, because each of them have a really, really good thing a part of them. But I think Tyrant's Throne ultimately was the climax, the best one. Number 4, Kings of Ash. This is book 2 in the Ash and Sand trilogy. What I loved about this one, more clever plot. So book 1 was a great setup and getting to know Ruka and Kale and that world. And it's left off on a huge kind of cliffhanger. It didn't feel like a cliffhanger to me, because I knew I was going right into book 2, but basically a cliffhanger if you take book breaks in between. This huge war pops off. The characters finally, you think these characters are finally about to meet, because book 1, the two characters are separate. They're living their own lives and they're about to meet. But book 2 throws something way more at you, and it gives you a whole lot more backstory as to how they came to be in this, how Ruka came to be where he's at and what he's doing. Much more origin and what he's been through. And then there's characters that you see in book 1 that had just like very little parts, and in book 2 you see their origin, so how they came to be where they are as well. So many origins of the characters that will be in book 1, and then just moving forward to book 3 happen in book 2, and how much of an impact and how in-depth and smart that Richard Nell wrote this story. Like 100%, you could tell he had the entire plan worked out from start to finish of the series, but book 2 was pivotal, and where a lot of those things happen. And in book 1, you're like, yeah, this is really good. I really like what's going on here. I like the story. I like the world. Book 2 is where you realize just how clever and crazy this is going to be. And you're just like, holy cow. Okay, I can't wait to see what happens next. And that momentum continues into book 3. And while book 3 is when the climax happens at the end, I think book 2 is really what put this series on another level and set the tone for the rest of the way. And then it just continues through to the finish. Now for the top 3. Number 3 is very hard. Again, these are all could be interchangeable, but number 3 was very hard because once you finish this, so number 3 is Time of Courage. Once you finish this book, most people who finish this debate if it is the best book in the series, and that is book 3 of the Blood and Bone trilogy, which is the follow-on trilogy to Faithful and the Fallen. To me, I just count it as book 7, because Faithful and the Fallen is 4 books, and then there's like 100 to 130 year gap, and then there's A Blood and Bone, which picks up where that one left off, 130 years later. And it finishes what the first series started. So to me, it is book 1 to 7 with a gap. So it's 2 clear series, but I just like, if you've read it all, you kind of understand that it's essentially book 7, but don't go into it thinking you need to read 7 books. Anyway, Time of Courage is so good because It is again another huge battle, very smart and well thought out battle and battle plans and tactics and new look on a fresh look on a battle scene from what everything else that John Gwynne did in the previous 6 books. So the battle is fantastic. It is one of the best battles and super long in because it is the climax of the series. But John Gwynne is known for like his character deaths. Like nobody is safe. People are going to die. Your heart is going to be wrenched out. This book has probably the biggest shocking throw the book into the corner, scream out loud character death happen. I believe if you know, then you know. It's one where you read it, you throw it down and go, no. And then you pick it up again and you read through it again and then you throw the book and it's just like, how the hell could he do this? That happens in this book. It is one of the most shocking deaths in all of them. To my opinion, you could debate some of them in the past, but 100% this was one. And then the battle on top of that. So, and then everything coming into a conclusion of all of those books puts this one firmly in the top 3. It could have been number 1, honestly, because it was so good, but alas, it is number 3. Number 2, Hero of Ages. This is book 3 in Mistborn Era 1. And this is when everything comes together again. The climax, it's super easy it's usually easy for a final book in a series or a trilogy to be the best book, even though I have a couple of book 2s on here because but it's just because like, okay, I've been reading the series and everything comes together. But Hero of Ages, one of the themes is that it's just so smart. And if Hero of Ages, the magic system still keeps changing in Mistborn. It is such an in-depth and fantastic magic system that you're going to be constantly learning about it. And it's not like other books where it's like, okay, let's do book 1 to introduce the world and introduce the magic system, and then let's just see how they use it. In Mistborn, every single book is something new, the magic system grows, they learn more, they start to use it differently. Other people start to use it differently. It starts to shape the world differently. Everything changes and the magic system evolves and you learn more. And that's what happens in this. It's still a lot of shocking aha moments to where you've been hearing about this from the beginning of the series. And then now you're illuminated as to, oh, that's how that works. That's why they're like that. So that's what happens in Hero of Ages. And then the how it all finishes off is also very well done. And all of the twists and who the Hero of Ages is and all that stuff comes and just so satisfying. So number 1, kind of hinted at this with A Time of Courage, but Wrath is number 1. These two go back and forth to which ones are the best ones in that series. But I think the difference with Wrath is, so I think if you just were to take the battle of Time and Courage and Wrath, A Time of Courage might beat it out, honestly. There is some new and cool things that happen in that individual battle at the end. But the characters in Wrath, you're just so much more invested in. Not only invested in the heroes and seeing how they turn out and rooting for them and reaching their goal because you've invested so much more time into them, but the bad guys, because the antagonists in Faithful and Fallen have some of the worst people in any books, and you see their end in them, and it is so much more satisfying. Some of those deaths are like the best deaths that you could give bad people, and not spoiling anything, but they are, yeah, it's just the conclusion to all of the characters, good and bad, were so good. Some of them were so emotional. It was just such a good conclusion, and it does set it up very well for a Blood and Bone for the follow-on. But I just think Wrath, because of how much time you've invested in, this being book 4 of the series, and the characters and what they've been through, it's a huge payoff. And not only that, but the very beginning of the book, there was a huge cliffhanger in book 3 of Ruin that picks up right away in the beginning of book 4, and that just from the start of the book is so fulfilling and just so good to read. So Wrath, the top number 1 fantasy book of all time for me. And once again, as always, we will see how these lists grow and change over time. I might revisit these annually. We'll see, because I read 70 books a year now. So it'll be easy to have things change up. I might even have to keep adding 5 spots each year, next year 15, and a year after that 20, because it's going to be really hard to distinguish between all these. We'll see how it goes. But that is my top 10 individual fantasy books of all time. What are yours? Do you know your number 1? Do you know number 3? How many spots would you need of this 10? What have you read on here? And do any of these now appeal to you? Whatever you want to talk about, let me know down in the comments and we can chat more there.